Talking Jets football, our lads football network, our lads football YouTube channel. And this is, of course, the one time that I get to have even more fun than usual since the Jets are my team, unfortunately. But that's for now. How can you not be psyched up for today's press conference with the new general manager and head coach? We're going to get into all of that. Matt O'Leary, of course, joining us here from the Matt O'Leary YouTube channel covering the New York Jets. How's it going, Matt?
I'm doing good. As you mentioned, an exciting day for the New York Jets, a new GM and new head coach introduced, and hard not to get excited after a press conference like that from Aaron Glenn.
Yep, and we're going to we have a couple of bites that we're going to show you what we're talking about here in just a little bit. Before we get started, I want to remind everybody, if you want to get a jump start and order your NFL draft guide, the Our Lads draft guide for the 2025 draft, you can do so. I have links in the description of how to do it. I still have the responsibility of writing the team preview pages in the guide, and the New York Jets are definitely one of those teams. So a lot of what I find out about the Jets, I wind up getting obviously from my own background, but I also get a lot of help from Matt, which is the reason why we're interviewing him. And again, check it out here. Best draft guide in the business. And again, 32 team previews, all sorts of scouting reports over at ourlads.com. All right. So Darren Muji is the new general manager, and Aaron Glenn, of course, we know him. Let's start with Muji. So what did you think about him? I mean, I was taken aback by his how freaking tall he is. I didn't realize he was that big. But hey, that's good. That's better than the opposite. So yeah, what did you think about the hire?
Yeah, I was a little bit surprised by it just because it felt like all last week that Lance Newmark was going to be the connection with Aaron Glenn. You know, they spent time together in Detroit, but a quick riser for Darren Muji, who got into the business in 2012, and then a little over 10 years later, he's now an assistant GM. So a quick rise, and he's been there through some different regime changes and an ownership change. So, you know, he had to, oversee the team or be a part of a team that had to change multiple times. And, you know, for me, I take a look at what they were able to do this year out in Denver. They had a bad cap situation, a lot of dead money, and they were still able to field a competitive team. So my hope is that he's able to take some of the things that he's learned out there in Denver, more specifically with, the cap and maneuvering around the cap and still fielding a talented roster, and hoping that he could bring that to New York with the Jets.
He's also young, and I know it could work against you, but I think it really works for the Jets if you're a positive thinker and you're happy about the hires, and you've got a 52-year-old Aaron Glenn, because there was a couple of things, and that's what we're going to highlight here really on the clip. Matter of fact, I'm going to bring that up now. And because I had a conversation like this. I just did my show earlier today with Jim Feist on Proline TV, and Jim's a handicapper. He's won millions of dollars, he's made millions of dollars in the industry. And we had this conversation about the Raiders and Pete Carroll. And I said, well, yeah, I think it's great that they hired Pete Carroll. This is a great hire. But what's after that? I mean, there's a lot of dysfunction here. Maybe he'll straighten that out, but he's old. So what happens in 3 or 4 years when he leaves? Is there a plan to succeed him? And is he part of that plan? He's going to bring. Well, Jim didn't really seem that cared that mattered. He was like, well, just win now. That's all that matters. And I said, well, Jim, that's because you're not a fan of a team. And he admitted that was the case. But when you're a fan of a team, and I know some Jet fans are probably feeling the same way that Bruce Beck did when he asked the question that we're going to get into a little bit. But that is something that was brought up in the press conference. And I'm going to start here. And it's something that, and I think this is the part where he says it and talks about it, because there were a couple of really cool sound bites that I'm sure everybody's going to be able to check out real soon. Actually, you know what? Let me make sure, obviously, you can hear this. And I'm pretty sure you know where I'm going out here. So let's go ahead and take a listen.
But here's what I do know. We're the freaking New York Jets, so we're built for this shit.
That was number one. And it doesn't go with what I'm going to get to that in just a little bit. But if anybody's going to play a soundbite anywhere today regarding this press conference, that has to be it, Matt.
It has to. That's the quote that stood out the most to me. And I think that's the kind of stuff that's going to resonate with his players. Like I saw on social media, some of the guys, reacting to it. John Simpson, the left guard, seemed to be fired up on Twitter over Aaron Glenn's speech. And I think what really led him to the New York Jets, or the decision rather for the New York Jets to hire Aaron Glenn, is for those leadership abilities. I know, and I've gotten a ton of it. People saying, "Oh, here we go. It's another defensive coordinator, first time head coach." And to an extent, yeah, that's true. We have no idea if it's going to work out or not with Aaron Glenn. But I think Glenn views himself as a leader and hopefully more of a CEO style of head coach than someone who's just going to come in and be a defensive guy and transition to a head coach. So I'm pumped up after his press conference. I think the players as well are, and he's going to demand a lot out of those guys.
Yeah, you really made a great point, because this is something that you talk about a lot when you go over is offensive coordinator, and is he going to hold on to that title? And a lot of times people are okay if he does, but on the defensive side, there's more of hey, it's just going to be the coach, right? Well, why can't he be the defensive coordinator? The offensive coordinator stayed like Andy Reid. He could be. I know it's not easy. I completely get that. But your point of talking about the number of defensive coaches that have been head coaches for the Jets for all these years, that was a problem with me as well. I'm like, come on, you got to hire an offensive guy. We have quarterback issues for like forever. Don't you think that's a coincidence? No, I don't, that we don't hire offensive coaches. But I love the fact that he talked about it. Like you said, he's talked about being a CEO. And again, whether he is the defensive coordinator or not, maybe this means he won't be. The fact is, it was so important for us as fans to hear him say that I am going to pay attention, or I have paid attention just as much in the offensive room as I do in the defensive room.
Exactly. And, that's such a key thing that people look at and be like, well, defensive guys, is he going to call the plays, or offensive guys, is he going to call the plays? And today he was actually asked about it at some point, if he was going to call defensive plays. He's not planning to. So I think that's another, I look at that as a good thing, because you look at Jeff Ulbrich, I think he really struggled trying to do both.
Yeah.
That was a really tough situation for him too, obviously being thrown in there mid-season. But point being, I think especially for a first-time head coach, hire a defensive coordinator you trust, let him run the defense, and you oversee everything. And I think that's probably the best path to success here.
All right. Now, I've set it up to go to the question, which initially was what I wanted to talk about. So here's Bruce Beck's question.
NBC4 New York, congratulations. You talked about sustained success. I think the fans just want success, any kind of success. How do you get there?
Sustained success. And that's what we're looking for, because I've lived it. And it's going to take hard work. It's going to take dedication. It's going to take us as coaches to make sure we teach and continue to teach. The small things about this game is what really wins games. The smartest teams win games. Situational awareness win games. It's our job as coaches to make sure we do that, because that's the difference between winning and losing, is the small things that we got to get ready to teach.
And I also like the fact that he's talking about teaching, because I thought the Jets were one of the worst teaching units out there. I just thought their coaching. And now, look, we know Robert Saleh is a really good defensive coordinator. And I'm not saying some of those guys aren't good coaches, but for the vast majority, it's just obvious they were way too talented to be that incapable of winning games the way that they were this season. And that goes down to coaching. There weren't a rash of injuries as an excuse. So I'm glad that he mentioned that as well. But he started off by answering that question, talking about sustained winning. This is why I was talking about the Pete Carroll deal. I'm not 20 years old, all right? So maybe a 20-year-old Jet fan doesn't really care. He's like Bruce Beck. I just want to win. But when you're at my age, no. I mean, you want to see some sustained success. You want to see that Aaron Glenn, like he's saying, I hope this is my last job. I hope it's his last job too. I hope he's here for 15, 20 years. And I hope that this is a team that wins 10 games every year and competes for a Super Bowl every year. That's what I want. I just don't want a quick fix and then Aaron Glenn somehow leaves or something, or I don't know, your quarterback gets hurt, you win 3 games, and it's back to being the same old Jets. I don't want to have to deal with this anymore. I just want to win and have sustained success, just like Aaron Glenn said.
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer because at least for me, I think back to, the last time the Jets had a winning record, 2015, that was such a flash in the pan season. It felt like, Mike McCagnon that offseason went all in to try to put a band-aid on getting veterans like Ryan Fitzpatrick and Brandon Marshall and Darrelle Revis came back. And it worked for, a 16 game season. They won 10 games. Unfortunately, that wasn't enough to get in the playoffs.
No.
It's kind of collapsed and they haven't been able to recover since then. Their highest win total since is 7 games, which is obviously not good enough. But, I'm hoping, and it's someone that Aaron Glenn references a lot, Bill Parcells, when he came into the New York Jets, I thought really set the tone from, the late 90s through the 2000s. They were a playoff team pretty consistently. Unfortunately, they never won a Super Bowl, but 3 AFC title games between 98 and 2010. And multiple years in the playoffs, and I think that's closer to what you want to see. Obviously, maybe with a better result at the end, you win a Super Bowl, but like you're saying here, it's not just about 2025; it's about 2025 and beyond. And changing the culture and building the thing, the program correctly, I think is really key for them.
Before we move away from coaching and GMs and stuff like that, and of course, we're going to get your top 5 needs for the Jets and go over free agency. Nothing. I didn't hear anybody, or at least in the press conference, ask about the OC job. And I don't know what kind of information you found out or anything like that. I was kind of surprised there wasn't a question about the OC job because that would have been my question. I would have been like, I would have set it up too. I would have been like, hey, if I'm Woody, that's like the first thing I'm asking you is what is your vision, or who do you have in place on your calling card list there? Who are you going to try to bring in to run the offense? Because again, he is a defensive guy. So this is a major position hire. And do we have any idea of any particular names or anybody that could be on his list?
Supposedly the favorite for the job is Nick Caley, who spent the last 2 years with the Los Angeles Rams as their passing game coordinator. And it feels like anyone who spends 5 minutes with Sean McVay usually ends up being an offensive coordinator or a head coach sometime.
Yeah, right.
We saw Zach Taylor, make a quick jump to being a head coach. And, there's a ton of different examples from both McVay and Shanahan tree on the offense.
Kevin O'Connell's
another great one. Exactly.
Yeah.
So Nick Caley, that seems like the name that I've heard get brought up the most. Clint Kubiak was another name. Now he took the Seattle job, I believe, yesterday or just a couple days ago. So that's one that's off the list. I kind of liked him because he had some play calling experience. He's done it a couple times with the Vikings and then with the Saints this past year. But with Caley, he hasn't made that jump yet to being a play caller. So there is some risk involved, obviously. But, Sean McVay and Bill Belichick both rave about him. He was with New England for a very long time as their tight ends coach. So that just feels like the name that's probably going to end up being the OC, I would guess.
Okay. Interesting. And I also heard, you speaking of New Orleans, I heard Rizzi is he still a potential option at special teams?
Yeah, I would think so. I would definitely think so, especially with, Aaron Glenn being a part of that Saints staff, and they were there together a few years ago. Assuming he doesn't get a job, which I would be very surprised if he ended up getting that Saints job, I think he was a very likely candidate for the special team spot.
Yeah, look, Brandt's done a good job, but the fact of the matter is, I think one of the main things you're going to be graded on, unless they change the rules again, because they've taken so much out of the return game as some sort of necessity to how you're successful in the NFL. It's how you can coach and get your kicking game in order. And the problem is that's been his weak spot. You're bringing in these veteran guys left and right. I'm still upset that we had Matt Araiza in this building and he's with the Chiefs because we went ahead and decided that we were going to stick with a guy who's almost 40 years old because I guess, we're trying to win now. So I think that's the thing that we need to do at some point. And whoever the new coordinator is, let's hope that he goes that route. I'm not saying to go draft a kicker and keep your fingers crossed. We know that could be a disaster, but they just got to get younger at that spot, and they got to find guys that are going to be here for the long haul as well. Just like Aaron said, some sustained winning as far as the place kickers and the punting job would be nice too.
Yeah, it would. And special teams really matters, especially when you get to the playoffs too. Kicking is such an important thing, and puntings. I know teams, go for it a lot now on fourth down, and with analytics, it feels like, the punting game's taken out a little bit, but it's really important. Those special teams plays, and now with the changed kickoff rule, you get more returns and more, game changing plays potentially. It's important to have a good unit. Brant Boyer did a good job for a long time, survived a lot of different regimes. I just think it was time to move on, and hopefully they find someone who's a quality replacement. Supposedly Mike Westhoff is going to be involved in the hiring process and also volunteer during training camp. And that really excites me as someone who, watched his special teams growing up and how good they were.
Yeah. He was like the back then he was definitely the dean of special teams. All right. So let's get into this personnel, this offseason. And they've already started with voiding some contracts and few agents, which we kind of figured would be available now with the New York Jets. So there's a lot of names to go through here. Let's start on offense. And look, we got to start, of course, here with Aaron. And you just did a video. I think it's your most recent video talking about the whole Aaron Rodgers situation with Aaron Glenn. And it sounds like if we had a bet on whether Aaron Rodgers would be back, it's sounding to me like it's about 75% at this point in time, or even better that he will.
Yeah, it's based on some of the comments and rumors, right? Like Aaron Glenn made it seem like, they're talking with Rodgers, and, at the end of the year, Rodgers was like, it's going to be up to the next head coach and the GM if they're going to keep me or not. And Woody Johnson, to his credit, said the same thing today, that, he's not going to have his input. It's going to be up to the GM and the head coach. So I'm very curious to see what ends up there with Aaron Rodgers. I think for me, I think he needs to take a pay cut again this year, because you look at the future cap considerations. If he doesn't, it's a major cap hit in 2026. So I would anticipate a rework deal if he is returning. And it's going to depend on who the OC is. He's going to have to want to play with that offensive coordinator and kind of let him do his thing. I don't think he can come back and have it be the Aaron Rodgers show again in 2025. I think, they're going to have to find a new identity on offense and let that offensive coordinator come up with it.
Yeah, that's without question going to be the big one. And that's the one they're going to have to tackle first. There's just no doubt about it. And then everything will fall after that. So what do you think? So let's say Aaron Rodgers does not come back, because if he does come back, there's no doubt that Davante Adams is going to come back. But let's just say Aaron is not back. Do you think Davante Adams is back?
I think it would be surprising if Davante Adams was here without Aaron Rodgers. If for whatever reason the Jets, move on, or if Aaron Rodgers says, you know what, I'm going to retire, I would anticipate Davante Adams would then want to go somewhere else where he could ring chase in his final years, which, totally understandable. Mm-hmm. He's, played in the league a long time, legendary wide receiver, has been awesome, but hasn't unfortunately won a Super Bowl yet at this point. And I don't think he'd want to be here for a Jets retool. So I think they're kind of a package deal at this point.
Okay. All right. So as far as unrestricted free agents right now on offense, and you look at the offensive line, and it looks to be that the two new guys, the two new tackles, won't be here, and Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses. Of course, we knew that one of them would probably not, but it's because that's Fashinu's job for 2025. And what's interesting is when you look at the Jets line right now, if Fashanu is going to be the left tackle, more than likely. Simpson was outstanding. I think they got more than they expected. Tippmann continues to get better. And Vera Tucker, he just has to stay healthy. And so it looks like now the Jets have 4/5 of their offensive line accounted for. So is that what you agree with that? And that becomes the last big question is who's going to fill that right tackle job?
Yeah, I do agree. And, kind of a little bit surprising to say this because the last few years, the offensive line has been a major issue, but I kind of like the state where the offensive line is at right now. You have, some young pieces who can continue to grow and develop together. I know, John Simpson's a free agent addition, but he was on the younger side when he was signed, I believe 27 years old. So it was really good in year one. I would anticipate the same thing. I am open to the idea of Morgan Moses coming back. I know he got banged up a lot last year, but he seems like such a good locker room guy and someone you'd like to have around this team and help develop some of the younger guys who are on that unit. But I would think this is the year where the Jets maybe take a swing in the middle rounds of the draft to try to fill that right tackle spot. I don't know if they're going to spend like crazy big money in free agency to try and fill it. That just kind of seems to go against the philosophy that they're going to have, I would think anyway.
Okay.
But I think your line's in a really good spot with, Olu going into year two, Joe Tippmann, as you mentioned, getting better each year. And I think AVT finding his spot at right guard and remaining mostly healthy this year. I look at that as major pluses on the board.
So Moji, is it do you think, have you actually looked at what the Denver model has been yet to determine how you think he might run the Jets?
It's kind of hard to say because this, in the most recent years, they didn't have a ton of money to spend because they were kind of hamstrung by the Russell Wilson deal. And at the same time, because of the trade, they didn't have a ton of draft picks either. They had a couple years where they didn't have first round picks. When he was an assistant GM, they landed Patrick Surtain, which obviously seems like a home run selection. He's been great for them. I kind of wonder if, you get a defensive coach in here in Aaron Glenn. And I know we spent time talking about, him being a CEO and not just a defensive guy, but I wonder if they come in here and look at this Jets defense that was here last year and go, we need someone on the back end, or we need someone on this defensive line next to Quinnen Williams or another edge rusher here. A part of me just would almost feel surprised if they would go, all right, we're going to go to the well on offensive line in the first round here. And I guess it's, TBD if they're going to spend, big money at that position.
Free agent. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's kind of really tough to tell, but I don't know if I would expect them to spend a premium asset in the NFL draft on this.
Okay.
Position.
And the other thing too is talk about coaching or not getting the proper coaching. The offensive line has definitely been a part of that. They haven't found the right guy there. Hopefully that's going to be another important hire is they got to bring someone in that's going to elevate those middle round guys. Can another coach come in and get Max Mitchell or Carter Warren? Maybe they can elevate. Maybe the coach comes in, talks to the head guy. Obviously he's looking at the tape and goes, you know what? I think I can get one of these guys to be our starting right tackle. And maybe not this year. So maybe we go out, maybe we bring Morgan Moses back, like you said, and give me a year to work with them. And by 2026, I can have, say, Carter Warren as a starting right tackle. That's what you hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, so far for either Max Mitchell or Carter Warren, they haven't really showed a lot through, 3 years for Mitchell and 2 for Carter Warren. But, we mentioned this Jets coaching staff, especially on the offensive side of the ball. I think they left a lot to be desired, but we have no idea who the new O-line coach is going to be. And maybe he's able to get more out of those guys, or if not, maybe they take a different swing in the third round on an offensive lineman and that one works out. I think it's hard for me to look at all the teams around the league and see different offensive lines that have a 6th round pick that can come in and play at a, functioning level. Even I'm not saying a Pro Bowl or all pro, but
sure,
a solid starter. And the Jets, it feels like they have to spend the 1st round pick on every position in order for them to get quality value.
That's right.
Olu 1st rounder, Joe Tippmann an early 2nd rounder, AVT a 1st rounder. So I think it's going to be really important for this next GM to be able to find some mid-round starters and mid-round talent for you, especially on the offense.
Yeah, because that's why I thought Joe Douglas. You probably agree with me. I think he did a really good job in the draft. Yeah, he had a bad first year. We get that. The Becton thing didn't work out, but the fact is that he didn't get any help. I mean, you draft these guys, especially all those middle round, late round guys, and it's up to your coaching staff. They got to coach them up, and unfortunately, that didn't happen enough. And let's hope the new regime, of course, does that a lot better. Speaking of draft capital, what do the Jets have right now
with their draft picks? They have the first round pick, a second round pick, 1/3. It's a later third though, because they traded their own in the Devontae Adams trade. A 4th, 2 5ths, and 2 6ths, I believe.
That's not bad. Okay,
yeah.
So they're in decent shape. There's no issues with their picks at this point. Okay. All right. So also on offense, when we move to defense, we got Conklin, and we don't expect Conklin back, do we?
If it's on a similar deal to what he just signed the last time, on maybe a 1 or 2 year deal, but you look at the tight end room and just in general, I think this is one where you're going to see a lot of turnover. So it wouldn't shock me if he was gone. Maybe on a 1 year deal, he's back, but that is definitely an area or a position group that I think the Jets need to look to improve on.
Yeah, and in our lads' first mock draft, this was again not. I know we're going to do one. We're actually going to have, say, myself and our senior scout Dave Syverton alternating picks, but this was just a regular board kind of mock draft that we put up, and we had Tyler Warren going to the New York Jets, and I've seen a few other mock drafts doing the same, and I'm not against that. I know they didn't do Bach Bowers last year, and I understood it. I was for it. I thought they needed to go and get younger at tackle. No problem. But this year is different because we got our tackle last year. Now, if you can get a guy like Tyler Warren, I think that's something that you definitely have to consider.
Yeah, I like Tyler Warren a lot. And if they do go on the offensive side of the ball in the first round, that's a guy that I would have circled. You look at maybe what happens with Devontae Adams, and maybe you're looking like a McMillan or a wide receiver in the first round there. Yeah. And we don't know how this board's going to fall, but I like Tyler Warren a lot as a prospect. He would excite me if that was the pick.
All right. Now on defense, what do you think about, and by the way, Schweitzer is also a guy that may or may not come back as a vet, but nothing big there. Okay. So Reddick, Kinlaw, Solomon Thomas, Fotu on the defensive line. Do you think all those guys are gone?
Yeah, I really do. I would take a look at San Francisco because Robert Saleh just went back there. And
Kinlaw and Thomas.
Yeah, might as well get the reunion going at that point. But unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of success with those guys. I would be almost stunned if they retained any of those.
Yeah, we've been saying this for the past couple of years. I mean, at some point, Quinnen, you got to give him somebody half decent to work with as a full-time defensive tackle. You can't just leave it up to him all the time. So that's also going to be very important. Okay, so the Jets did not I was a little bit surprised. I mean, they extended Carter, but they did not extend Sherwood. I'm not sure why. Maybe they just got to the point where they didn't know who the coach was going to be and if he'd fit in their system. I don't know. Or maybe they've just figured Sherwood wants a boatload of cash. But he's a free agent. And Mosley, I was just thinking by middle of the season, especially when Mosley got hurt, my first thought was, all right, well, Sherwood's finally doing what they've expected him to do. So he's going to get re-signed and they're going to cut Mosley. Now, I don't know what's going to happen. What do you think?
So I think you bring up an interesting point with Jamie Sherwood, because this past year is like he finally took that step and played more consistently, especially, with the injuries at the linebacker position. He was asked to do more, but I thought he played really well. I would like to retain him because, you find someone in the draft, a middle round guy, you develop, he gets better.
There's one that worked. Yeah,
right. Gets better year over year. Keep him. Sure. But I look at, Ulbrich in Atlanta as maybe a spot where he'd want to link up with one of his former guys, or maybe he's another one who goes.
They do need an inside linebacker. Yeah.
I think they would be very in on Jamie Sherwood. So I would like to retain him. I don't think it's a given that he's back though, just because he might have a decent market, especially with some former coaches who may be in other places now around the league.
And what about Mosley?
I think he retires. Unfortunately, with the injuries, I just don't know how he's going to be able to come back and play with, a neck and a back at his age. I think it's going to be really tough for him to come back and play. He never looked really fully healthy at all this year in the very little that we did see him. So, I liked Mosley a lot as a Jet. I thought he was a good player, but I think it's over for him, unfortunately.
What do the Jets save there if he doesn't come back?
That's a good question. I think he might need to be a post June 1 designation, and they would save more because of how his contract is structured.
Okay.
But you would save a little bit of money in cutting him. I don't remember.
It's considerable, right? It's about 10 million or something like that, at least, I believe.
Yeah, that sounds right. I'm pulling it up now to see if I can find what it would be. Post June 1 would save the Jets $8 million. No, $4 million. $8 million dead cap hit, $4 million in cap saving. If it was pre June 1, it would add an additional $3.7 million. So that's why I'm post June 1 cut.
Okay. Well, but likely you don't expect he's going to be here, and he's probably going to retire either way.
I would think so.
All right. Defensive backfield. There could be an awful lot of changes here. So as you can see, you got all the green. Those are the free agents, the unrestricted free agents. And Reed, you just talked about some of these ex-players. And I guess Reed's headed to San Francisco. You could book that. And I think the writing was on the wall anyway. I mean, they weren't going to pay Reed what he's looking for. He's going to look for a lot of money, and the Jets can't afford to pay a lot of money. They've already got Gardner there. So what do you think regarding the other free agents? Again, it's Reed, Eccles at corner. It's Davis, Oliver, Clark at safety, and Tony Adams is a restricted free agent. What do you think they're going to do there? So let me know what you think about these DBs.
Yeah, of the group, I think the guy that I would like to retain the most, and considering contracts too, like I think Reed is the best player of them, but I think someone's going to pay him to be a number one corner in the free agency, and the Jets can't afford it. So I think I would target Brandon Eccles. That's another guy in the mid rounds or even later rounds that they were able to draft and develop. And, maybe he competes with a Quantez Stiggers or someone else that they add in the draft for the other outside starting corner job. Like we said with DJ Reed, I just think he's going to get too much money on the market. At safety, I would look to almost completely overhaul that room. I don't think Tony Adams, Chuck Clark, or Ashton Davis were all that great last year. Jalen Mills, I thought did okay filling in, but he's another guy who's on the older side. So maybe he wants to go, somewhere where he views that he could compete for a championship. But if you can get Mills back on the cheap, maybe I retain him. And Isaiah Oliver too, actually, who's a free agent, big special teams role, I think filled in nicely for Michael Carter when he was hurt this year. So if you can get him back on a similar contract, I think I'd be looking to do the same, but you're probably saying goodbye, I would say, to at least Chuck Clark, DJ Reed, Ashton Davis of that group.
And then we still don't know whether or not, if he's healthy, whether or not Bernard Converse, who looked like he was taking a step up in the preseason before the injury, he came back, but still, I don't know how much time he got. And then you've got Stiggers, as you mentioned, and he sure looked good, of course, early on in the preseason. And I think another thing we have to keep in mind is Aaron Glenn. This is going to be a position that is going to really, coaching wise, get the benefit of having Aaron Glenn hanging around, teaching these kids. So, bringing in some good young new faces that fit his model and what he's trying to do is going to be good for the team.
Absolutely. I can't think of a better positional group that's going to benefit more than those defensive backs. And, Sauce Gardner's obviously their number one corner and he's under contract, but I think Sauce is going to really have a nice bounce back year after having an offseason with Aaron Glenn going into his fourth season now. So I'm excited to see what he can do with that room.
Okay. Let's see. And by the way, with Adams being a restricted free agent, what do you think they do with him? Do you think they do they tender him? And if so, how? Yeah,
maybe they look to bring him back. I don't I don't know if I view him as a starter. So I don't know what kind of tenure they're going to put on him and expect to get anything back. Like, I don't think they're putting a second or third round tender on him. That's an interesting one. I don't know what direction they're going to go there, but I think I'd be surprised if he ended up being slotted in as a starter.
All right. Now, veterans who you believe still can get cut. We talked about Rodgers and Adams. We don't know what's going to go on there. We talked about Mosley. So you got Lazard. He's definitely the big one, right? And is that the same thing as if Rodgers stays, chances are they don't screw around with that dead money with Lazard and they just go ahead and ride him for another year?
I hope that they would move on.
I know. We all do, right?
The drops are just too much for me. They signed him to essentially be their number 2 receiver in 2023. It just did not work out. At times earlier this year, he seemed like he was on the same page with Aaron Rodgers and it was working a little bit, but I would hope that they would move on for the cost.
All right. And Taylor. So do you think if Rodgers comes back, I can't see a situation where at some point in this draft, and trust me, there are going to be a lot of options in the middle to late at quarterback to draft, just like last year when they brought in Travis. You could do the same thing and bring in a guy like that and wait a year, because we don't expect it's going to be anybody that you might even want to go in the second round. That's going to be another question, is if Rodgers comes back, everybody knows it's only like a 1-year deal, maybe 2, I don't know. But how high do you think the Jets would actually contemplate a quarterback? And then what do you do with Taylor?
Yeah, that's the interesting part too. Maybe the second round, depending on how much you see some of these guys rise up the board. Like Jackson Dart is a player who I think is going to rise up draft boards the longer this draft process goes on.
Quinn Ewers.
Quinn Ewers is another, Will Howard, Kyle McCord. There's going to be some mid-round guys who come off the board here and probably go earlier than anticipated just because of the position that they play. I'm not against it. I don't know what you could realistically expect out of Jordan Travis after, he got hurt his final year in college and then didn't have a single practice this year because of the injury. So I have no idea what you can expect out of him going into 2025. If they find someone that they like, take him. If that's the case, you probably have to move on from Tyrod Taylor, though, because I don't know if you're going to roster 4 quarterbacks. But there's a risk with that, too, because of Aaron Rodgers' age and injury history. I kind of like having Tyrod Taylor around as someone who can come in and start and, play relatively well for you. So it's going to be interesting at that spot at the quarterback position because, sure, you could draft someone, but then you're likely going to have to lose that veteran. And then are you ready to turn to that either mid-round rookie or Jordan Travis after if Aaron Rodgers goes down?
Yeah, I wonder whether or not they could screw around with keeping Travis on some injured list for another season. Who knows? So I guess it's possible. But yeah, that is going to be a very interesting decision they have to make. Do you favor using a second-round pick on a quarterback, especially if it's one of those guys, which you just mentioned, as opposed to a 5th or 6th round or 4th round guy who could be more in the lines of like Dylan Gabriel, Seth Hennigan, who knows, one of those guys? What would you, and again, keeping in mind that if you use up that second round pick on a quarterback, he's sitting in the bench, you're not getting anything out of him. And it's a premium spot in the draft that you're taking away from another important position. Which way would you rather go?
I think I'd rather go more of a position of need, just because I look at the tight end room. I think they absolutely have to add someone at some point.
Yes.
Probably within the first 3 rounds of the draft. And then, defensive line and defensive back is going to be a big need too. So I get those who say, I want the quarterback of the future here. That's fine. They might have to wait another year though, because of some other needs. And, in the quarterback class, I don't think this quarterback class is going to be as good as what next year's is looking like at this point.
Okay. Speaking of the kicking game we talked about before, Greg Zuerlein, do you Do you let him go and say good riddance? We got to start from scratch, and you save a couple million, or do you go ahead and give him another shot?
I think you move on. It looked really bad when he had to kick this year, unfortunately. And, for kickers, it feels like once they lose their confidence, once that goes, it's usually over.
And it really started the downfall of the team. His miss against Denver really started everything.
Yeah, and it didn't get better after that. It wasn't just that one miss. So I think you're either looking at an undrafted free agent or maybe a bargain bin selection in free agency. I don't think it's going to be a position they spend a ton of money on or a premium asset. Like I don't see them drafting a kicker in the second round, like Mike Nugent in 2005.
No.
But I do think they will have a different kicker on their roster next year.
Okay, top needs. It's up to you if you'd like to go through in order, or we can do that afterwards. I'll let you go.
Yeah. So for me, looking at top needs for this team, in no particular order right now, I have interior defensive line, safety, tight end, potentially wide receiver, depending on what happens with Devontae Adams. And then I might go edge rusher. I know you're getting Jermaine Johnson back, but they're going to be losing a lot of guys on that defensive line. And I think that line in general needs to be overhauled outside of those two in Will McDonald and Jermaine Johnson.
Yeah, it's really tough to go over 5 because we don't know what they're going to do with Sherwood. And if Sherwood doesn't get resigned, then obviously they got to get a linebacker in here. And if he is signed, and the other thing too is what's the defense going to be? I mean, Detroit plays pretty much like a 4-3, even though they play pretty similar to the way the Jets line up. I mean, it's, I don't really think Detroit plays 3 linebackers a lot.
No, I would anticipate, they'll have the 4 down linemen, which they did in Detroit and the Jets have been doing. Probably 2 linebackers on the field. I think the main difference is they'll play a lot more man coverage in comparison to zone. And I think they'll blitz more with Aaron Glenn, but everything else in like the alignment, I think is going to be relatively similar.
Okay. So then let's try to put this in order. Okay. And we also have to throw in an offensive tackle too, correct?
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. So number 1, let's see. And we have to put a quarterback in there. So let's do that. Okay. So number 1, now, are we going to say quarterback because of the fact that it's obvious they need a long-term quarterback or not? How do you think that? Tell me how you think we should look at this, even if Rodgers comes back, because we know it's a need, but should it be, it's obvious. It just need a franchise quarterback. It should be number 1.
Yeah. Because that's the position that matters the most, the quarterback spot. But even still, if Rodgers is coming back, I think that moves down for me because you could kind of band-aid it for a year. And if you're looking at like things that they need immediately and right now, I would definitely have, I think, tight end and interior defensive line over quarterback for now.
Okay. So let's, and then I guess as far as the edge, let's see, you got McDonald, and Jermaine Johnson, of course. And that was the other thing that happened is once Jermaine went down in the Tennessee game, I just remember being like, you got to be kidding me. If there's any guys to lose, he's like one of the top 5 guys you just can't lose because you just felt that he was on his way to having a breakout huge season.
Yeah, he really did. And that was a big blow early in their season. He played really well in year 2. He took a big step forward. I thought the same thing was going to happen again. And unfortunately with the Achilles, it might take him a little bit to get back up to speed too. So that's another, factor that I think we have to play in this.
And you need a 3. You need 3 definitely on a 4-3. And like you said, at this point, it's like 1.5. I mean, I might say 2 because you got Clemens, but Clemens is better suited as a backup. He's no starter. So do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. I think him having to be a regular and play upwards of 50% of the snaps was a big reason why their defense struggled this year.
And again, coaching up front because of those three kids. You have to be able to find out in this day of the salary cap if you can get Watts, Taylor, McGregor, you can get even just one of them, but you get lucky and you can get two of them to become contributors on your defensive line, then you're in really good shape.
Exactly. And, at that point, you feel a little bit better about your depth. And, that might be part of it too. Like the Jets have high end talent on their defensive line, and, McDonald and Johnson and Quinnen Williams. I think they just need to round out some of the depth of the unit.
Okay. So, would you then think that it should be, based on what you were talking about, defensive tackle and tight end should be the first two needs?
Yeah, I would put those as the top two, and then safety after that, I believe.
Okay. And then you'll put quarterback after that?
Yeah, I'll go quarterback 4.
All right. So then that leaves offensive tackle and wide receiver. Offensive tackle, probably, right?
Yeah, I would say offensive tackle. And if we're operating under the assumption that Aaron Rodgers is back, then I think Devontae is back. So that lessens the need a little bit for me.
All right. So before I let you leave, we've gone over all these hypotheticals and everything. So let me just wrap up with what you would do. So what would you do? Would you bring back Aaron Rodgers?
I would bring back Aaron Rodgers if he's okay with being one of the 53 guys, essentially. So like if he's good with taking the pay cut we talked about, if he's good with letting whoever the offensive coordinator is, calling plays and letting them run the show. And if he wants to be a stopgap for a year, that's fine. If he wants to come back and just continue to do things, his way, have his guys in here, run his offense the way that he wants to run it, call the plays how he wants to call it, I don't think it's worth it, because then you're kind of wasting is a harsh word, but it feels like you're kind of stuck with it for another year before you're finally turning over the leaf with this new regime. So if he wants to be a part of this new regime, I'm good with it. If he wants to continue to, do things how he's done it the last 2 years, I would probably move on.
Do you have any free agents right now that are out there that you would like to see the Jets talk to?
Honestly, especially after the performance yesterday, I think the safety read from the Kansas City Chiefs would be one that I would target. I think it's a huge position of need. I think safety is, a pretty good free agent market. The Vikings have a safety as well hitting the market who, maybe you take a look at as well. There's a few options at that position, but I think that's one that you could look to add, one in free agency and one in the draft, to kind of remake that room.
You think the Jets are in really good shape with their running back room?
Yeah, I think so. Breece Hall, I know he didn't have the monster year everyone was hoping for, but I still am a big fan. I'm buying the Breece Hall stock, and I think Isaiah Davis surprised me. And, Braylon Allen at points last year looked like he could be a serviceable running back at this level. So I roll with those three. I wouldn't change anything.
Yeah, it might be interesting where Aaron came from with the Detroit offense. I wonder how he might feel about, I like the way that Montgomery and Gibbs were used. Well, you got Allen and Hall. So maybe that's pretty much what you'll see here. But I agree. And you know what? Who do you blame? Do you blame anyone? Aaron Rodgers has to get some of the blame with how little Breece Hall was able to get touches, because we know how good he is. We know the offensive line was better than it was the last couple of years, and yet he just didn't seem like he got enough touches.
Yeah, I agree. There wasn't a single game this year where he had 20 carries, which was really surprising to me. I know early in the year he wasn't putting up a great yards per carry number, but as the year went on, I thought he got more productive. And that's someone that I would use more in the passing game. I think every time he touches the ball, he's a yards after catch guy, and someone who can make plays happen with the ball in his hands. So I think he should be getting upwards of 15 carries a game. Maybe if you're doing the Detroit model, you split it a little bit more, or, some weeks he's the lead back and other weeks it's more of a package with, Allen and Davis. But I think he should definitely be utilized more. And I do think Rodgers plays a factor in it. They had the second most passing attempts in the league and the fewest rushing attempts in the league. And that's something that I think needs to change next year.
Yeah, and again, that's the thing that you were talking about with what kind of control does he have running the offense? Because when he's running the offense and he's being able to have 100% control of what the play is called, that's where you're going. You know, I know you want to throw the football, Aaron, but you got to run the ball a little bit. And I think there was way too much passing for a 40-year-old, especially for a 40-year-old. If he was 30 years old, all right, maybe I want to see Aaron running around a little bit. But at 40 years old, establish a running game. You know?
Exactly. And that's a big factor to why I'm hesitant about bringing Aaron Rodgers back. Again, like if he is willing to take the pay cut and willing to give up some of the control, that makes it a little bit easier for me, but I can't just do another year of more of the same. They're going to throw it 45 times a game. And I don't think that's the recipe for success for this team.
No, I hope they get back to, or at least develop the mindset of running the football. And again, if they do that, then that offensive tackle position is definitely something to keep an eye on. All right. Lastly, are there any players, young players, that you think, whether they were draft picks last year or just young, second-year guys that impressed you enough to believe that they can be a part of the future?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think the obvious one that I'll point to is Olu Fashanu in his role last year. I think he's going to be a legitimate plus starter here for the New York Jets for a while. Unfortunately, I don't think we saw enough out of Malachi Corley for us to make any sort of judgments on him going forward. But I guess to give you another guy who is going into his second year that I thought surprised me in a positive way was Isaiah Davis. I think, he could have a special teams role and a depth running back role. It felt like every time he touched the ball, he had some juice to his game. It was a little bit quicker than I was anticipating too for someone that size. Yeah. So I look at him as someone who could be, a nice depth player on this team.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to follow some of these guys that came out of that 2022 draft and how they're going to be compensated because some of them got to make money. And, the running back position, what are they going to do with Brees? So we're going to have to follow that 2022 class, and whenever those decisions have to be made, that's going to be very important.
Yeah, it is. I'm wondering how they decide who they're going to pay and who maybe, unfortunately, they're not able to, but they're eligible for extensions this offseason. And that's something that Glenn and Darren Moogie are going to have to decide who they want to pay first.
Yeah, and hopefully they can find a way to keep them all if possible, because, again, you want to keep your guys. And all these guys that we're talking about are all positive guys. There's no reason to let them go unless you just can't figure out a way to afford it. So
exactly.
All right, Matt, great job. I really appreciate it. Tell me a little bit more about what you're going to be doing to cover the Jets on your channel. And, of course, we'll have a link in the description so everybody can check that out.
Yeah, so at Matt O'Leary, NY, talking all things New York Jets. Right now, a lot of coaching news going on, so we'll react to any announcements on the coaching staff. And very soon, it'll be draft season and free agency season.
Yeah, we're almost there. We're kind of there already. But first things first, like you said, let's see about this coaching staff. Let's round it out into shape. Very important that you can say what you want. It's fun with the players and all that. But it starts with finally developing a really good coaching staff. And if we can do that, that's the beginning of putting together, as Aaron said, a sustained winning culture. And it starts with the coaching staff. So Matt will be looking out for those videos. And again, unless something really major happens between now and the draft, I'll definitely look forward to talking to you when the offseason is over and the draft is over as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
You got it, Matt.